Peace. This is Wise for Wise Words Media, and I'm back at you to address something that came up based on a video that I did the other day, exposing the true history of Canelo Alvarez and how he was more of a media-made sensation rather than a great boxer. Now, Canelo was a media-made sensation because Floyd Mayweather was the face of boxing, and he made a lot of money for boxing on the two biggest fight nights of the year, which are Cinco de Mayo in May and Mexican Independence Day weekend in September. So when Floyd was on his way out the door, they started thinking, who's going to be the new face of boxing to sell boxing on those two big nights? So who better than a Mexican boxer? So in comes Canelo Alvarez. They start getting you familiar with Canelo because they started putting him in the ring with fighters that were either smaller or lesser opposition or past their prime, like Shane Mosley, and they started getting you familiar so that this way the wheels were in motion for Canelo to take those two big nights. So I got some backlash for the video, and some people said, oh, well, you're just hating on Canelo. Canelo did the same thing that Floyd Mayweather did. He cherry-picked his way. Floyd was a cherry picker. Floyd fought people past their prime. So today we're going to examine this. We're going to see, did Floyd Mayweather cherry-pick his way to the top? Or did he really take on top-tier opposition during his career? So let's do the knowledge. So Floyd Mayweather turned professional in October of 1996. Floyd Mayweather, in just 18 fights, after only 18 fights and in just 2 short years, decides to step up, all the way up in competition, and takes on the king of the hill, the top guy in his division, which was Genaro Hernandez. Genaro Hernandez dominated that division for over 10 years, and he was a big 5'11" fighter, way big for that division, with a long reach and, good jab, and he was a very solid boxer. It was such a challenge that if you go back and look up the fight between the two, in the pre-fight hype video, Jim Lampley for HBO is saying, are you tired of the best not fighting the best? Well, today you're in for a treat because the two best in the division will be facing each other. So much so that after the promo video ends, Jim Lampley turns to Larry Merchant and says, is this too much and too soon for the young Mayweather? So we find out shortly that it wasn't too much. In fact, Floyd Mayweather ends up stopping Genaro Hernandez in like the 8th round, after 8 rounds or something, and becomes champion for the first time in only 2 years. Now, in contrast, how long did it take Canelo Alvarez, and how did he do it? Canelo turned pro in 2005. And in 2011, they decide to finally step him up in competition to fight for a belt. And who does he fight? Does he go after the king of the hill, the top guy, one of the top champions? No. What he ends up doing is he ends up, the WBC, which stands for We Built Canelo, they select Matthew Hatton. Matthew Hatton was a 147-pound fighter. He was a welterweight. They select him to make him fight Canelo at 154 pounds, junior middleweight, for Canelo's first title shot. And that's how Canelo becomes champion for the first time, fighting a smaller guy. Am I surprised? No. So now, what happens after Floyd becomes champion? Does he start cherry picking then? Well, let's see. Floyd Mayweather then takes on Diego Chico Corrales. Diego Chico Corrales was a pound-for-pound fighter. For those who don't know what pound for pound, the media puts out a list of the 10 best fighters in all of the sport of boxing annually. And the year that Floyd fought Diego Chico Corrales, Chico Corrales was ranked number 5 in the world. In fact, he was ranked higher than Floyd Mayweather. Mayweather was ranked at number 7 or 8. So not only is Floyd fighting somebody in the pound for pound list, but Floyd took on somebody that was ranked higher than him. So much so that Floyd Mayweather was an underdog going into the fight. Chico Corrales was the favorite to win. All the media and the broadcasters were saying Chico Corrales is the favorite to win the fight. So how did that go? Floyd Mayweather knocks him down 5-6 times in the fight. I felt bad for my boy Chico Corrales because I like Corrales. And, it was a massacre. He destroyed it. Completely one-sided fight. So, it doesn't stop there. Floyd continues to take on top-tier competition. He goes on to fight Jose Luis Castillo. Now, the Castillo fight, he fights him twice. The first fight, Floyd breaks his hand in the fight. So now Floyd is fighting with one hand. In the post-fight interview, Larry Merchant says, well, you look like you were having a rough time in there. Do you really think you won? And Floyd Mayweather said, yes, I won. Yes, I really won. And if he wants, we could run it back. We could do it right back. And guess what happens? They do run it back. And in the second fight between Floyd and Castillo, Floyd completely dominates him. And he didn't wait 4 or 5 years like Canelo's waiting to fight Golovkin 3-4 years later. He fought him within like 4 or 5 months and completely dominated him. And left no questions about it that Floyd was the better fighter. To the point where Castillo didn't even want a rematch. So next he fights Philip Endo. Now Philip Endo's a very interesting guy because Philip Endo's one of those people that if you weren't watching boxing back then, or if you're not like a historian that goes and go and do the knowledge, you could look at Floyd Mayweather's career history and look at Philip Endo and just be like, oh, that's a cherry pick because I don't know him. But if you were watching boxing back then, or just go look up his record, Philip Endo was a monster. He was a knockout machine. Philip Endo was from South Africa. He had 30, at the time he fought Floyd Mayweather, he had 33 fights. He was 32-1, and 30 of those 32 wins were by way of knockout. He was a knockout machine. 30 of the 32 were by way of knockout. That's a 93% knockout rate. So Floyd Mayweather yet again challenges himself and fights the hard-hitting knockout machine Philip Endo. That's when you see the famous Floyd Mayweather up against the ropes doing the shoulder roll, and Philip Endo throwing punches and not touching nothing. So, yeah, Floyd goes, dominates Endo. Then, Floyd is supposed to fight Zab Judah in a mega fight. But Zab Judah drops the ball and he loses to Carlos Baldomir. So what does Floyd Mayweather do? Oh, am I going to, did he run away from Baldomir? No. He ends up taking on Carlos Baldomir, beats Carlos Baldomir, and beats Zab Judah. He beat both of them. So he left no stone unturned when it came to that situation at the time. So that's the thing. People forget there's 2 Floyd Mayweathers. There's Pretty Boy Floyd and there's Floyd Money Mayweather. Pretty Boy Floyd was the younger Floyd. And that Floyd Mayweather was more aggressive because he was more in his natural weight. And he was fighting people that were practically his same size. So that's why he was knocking everything out. But then as he got older and he started stepping up in weight class and dominating other higher weight classes, fighting bigger people, the game becomes different. You can't go in there and bang your way through. You got to start thinking your way through. And that's when your boxing IQ kicks in. So you got to be more defensive, and you got to be more of a boxer. Move your head more. You got to, change levels. Hit the body. That's where the famous jab to the body starts to come in. And Floyd ends up moving up in weight, and he takes on Oscar De La Hoya. And now this is the birth of Money Mayweather. Money Mayweather, when he was promoting the fight with Oscar De La Hoya, he said, me and Oscar are both good guys. So one of us has to be the bad guy. So Floyd now takes on that alter ego where he starts becoming the brash, flashy, throwing money. He becomes that guy, only to sell, to promote the fight. So he goes in there, dominates De La Hoya. And what does he do after that? Does he cherry pick? No. Throughout Floyd Mayweather's career, even when he was Pretty Boy Floyd, he was calling out the top tier opposition. And nobody wanted to respond to him. He would call out the top tier guys at the time. He was calling out guys like Joel Casamayor, the Cuban boxer that was a sensation. He was calling out Prince Nassim Hamed, who HBO was already putting him as one of the greatest of all time. He was calling out Prince Nassim all the time. He was calling out Costa Tszyu. He was calling out what's this guy from the Brazilian boxer? It'll probably come to me. Popo something. Popo Freitas. He was Arcelino Popo Freitas, who was a knockout machine. He was calling out Freitas. He was calling out Shane Mosley when Shane Mosley was young and in his prime. He was calling out Oscar De La Hoya. Floyd was calling out all the best fighters after every fight. When they would give him the post-fight interview, he always called out Prince Nassim, Joel Casamayor, Freitas, Paul Spadafora. He was calling out all the best fighters. Shane Mosley, De La Hoya. None of them wanted. They never responded to him. So Floyd had to take on whoever the best at the time was that wanted to fight him. So again, he was calling out Costa Tszyu. Costa Tszyu, again, was a pound-for-pound fighter after he shocked the world and beat Zab Judah. So Floyd's calling out Costa Tszyu for a fight, but Ricky Hatton comes in and destroys Costa Tszyu. Ricky Hatton becomes the new Pitbull. He's a Pitbull knocking out everything. Really good, undefeated fighter from the UK. So since Costa Tszyu got replaced by Ricky Hatton in the pound-for-pound list, Floyd Mayweather goes out and calls out Ricky Hatton. Now he takes on Ricky Hatton. Both undefeated, both pound-for-pound fighters. Floyd Mayweather knocks him out with the now famous check hook. As Ricky Hatton started coming towards him, boom, over. So he takes on a pound-for-pound fighter in Ricky Hatton. Then, after the Hatton fight, Floyd Mayweather takes 2 years away from boxing. He semi-retires. Then he comes back. When he comes back, does he take a tune-up fight after 2 years, which would be understandable? No. He goes straight to the top. He takes on Juan Manuel Marquez. If you go back, you can look it up now. Juan Manuel Marquez, at the time that they fought, was the ranked number 2 fighter in the world. He was pound for pound number 2 in the world, only behind Manny Pacquiao. So Juan Manuel Marquez, Floyd Mayweather selects him to go in, and it was a masterclass. He one-sided fight. It was so much so one-sided that when Juan Manuel Marquez knocked out Manny Pacquiao, and they asked him in the post-fight, would you want to get a rematch with Floyd Mayweather? He said, no, I'm not going to fight Floyd. For what? Y'all saw the first fight. Y'all saw what happened. It's going to be the same thing. And I love Juan Manuel Marquez, one of my favorite fighters. And he kept it a buck. He said, why am I going to fight him again? You saw what happened the first fight. Nothing's going to change. So there you have it. He's fighting Ricky Hatton. Marquez after a 2-year layoff when he was the number 2 pound-for-pound fighter. Then he fights Shane Mosley, who after he knocked out the cheater, what's his name, Margarito, after he knocks out Margarito, Mosley is in the top 10 pound-for-pound list. Floyd Mayweather fights Mosley, and he beats Shane Mosley, who was in the pound-for-pound list. Then he goes on and he beats Miguel Cotto, who is an all-time great Hall of Fame fighter. And Miguel Cotto just made history beating Maravilla Martinez for the middleweight title. So Cotto was still winning belts at that time, and he beat Miguel Cotto, another one of my favorite fighters of all time. So Floyd Mayweather then, towards the end of his career, takes on Manny Pacquiao. But before we go to the Manny Pacquiao fight, yes, while we're on the subject of Canelo, and he did take on Canelo Alvarez, let's not forget, Floyd Mayweather was almost 40 years old when he fought Canelo. He was about 36, 37 when he fought Canelo. And Canelo was about 23 years old. And some people say, oh, well, he was younger. He was inexperienced. No, the experience was the same because Canelo had about 44 fights at the time and Floyd had about like 46 or so. Or maybe Canelo had 42 and Floyd had 44. But they both had about the same amount of fights. So the age advantage was to Canelo. And they both had the same amount of professional experience. So the better man won. And the older man, Grandpa Floyd, won. So moving on, he takes on Manny Pacquiao. Manny Pacquiao, people say, oh, Pacquiao was past his prime. How could Manny Pacquiao be past his prime when 4 years or 5 years after the Mayweather fight, Manny Pacquiao gets one of the biggest victories in the sport of boxing when he beat the young, undefeated, pound-for-pound ranked fighter, Keith Thurman. So how is it that he was past his prime when he fought Floyd, but then 4 years later, he's still in his prime, beating people left and right, and even beating a pound-for-pound undefeated young fighter? But he was washed up. He wasn't in his prime anymore when he fought Floyd. So bad that he started making excuses. Pacquiao started talking about his shoulder was hurt. But then 3 weeks later, you seen him playing basketball in the Philippines. Anyway, so there you have it. Floyd Mayweather, throughout his career, took on the top tier fighters in his division. He took on pound for pound fighters. I named you easily at least 4 or 5 pound for pound fighters. And another 2 or 3 guys that were pound for pound in their division. So Canelo, in stark contrast, has never fought. He doesn't fight pound for pound fighters. He fought Mayweather, who was pound for pound, lost to Floyd Mayweather. He fought Golovkin, who was pound for pound, but those 2 fights ended in controversy. It's the only times he challenged himself against a fellow pound for pound guy in the top 10 pound for pound. And he lost 1 and the other 2 were in controversy. So those 2 careers cannot be compared. Floyd Mayweather always fought the top tier competition, and Canelo, although he still has time to right the wrong, what Canelo has to do now is step up in competition. Canelo has to start taking, the only way that he could try to save his career is by taking on these 5 guys. And those 5 I'll break down in the next video. Peace.